everybody. We're really excited to have Jane McWilliams here with us today for our third Arundel Heritage Conversation. Jane is a historian. She lives here in Annapolis, and she's the author of this mammoth book, which covers 300 years of Annapolis history, Annapolis, City on the Severn, a history. And we're going to cover about a half a page of this book in great depth. And that will just be the teaser for all of you who want to read the other 900 pages. So I thought, Jane, we might start off just asking you a bit about yourself. Tell us why you were interested in the history of this area and how you started this project.
Well, I've been interested in the history of this area for a very, very long time, an embarrassingly long time, because I started indexing the old Colonial Maryland Gazette as a young mother a very long time ago, and that was kind of fun. You know, you read the old newspapers, and it's really fun, a lot more fun than reading the paper today. Although maybe someday somebody will read the Capitol, I don't think so. Anyhow, and went from there to working for Ed at the archives, which I did for many, many years, and then I got involved with this. It took about 12 years to do the Annapolis book. Yeah. I had
almost as long as growing a vineyard.
Oh, listen, but it's not good to drink. I mean, your wine is a lot better. And I've since been doing contract work, mostly for the city of Annapolis. So I've had a great time doing history.
So let's start at the beginning of your book. Tell us about the very first settlers in Anne Arundel County and how they became to be owners of the land. What was this legal process by which people actually were able to get title to the land in this area?
Well, you know, Maryland was owned by the Calvert family. Honest, it really was.
All of Maryland.
All of Maryland. All of Maryland was owned by the Calvert family, who had a charter from Charles I, 1632, and the rent to the crown was 2 Indian arrowheads and a fifth of any of the gold and silver found. That's it. Other than that, the Calverts owned Maryland. So they had the land, they could make towns, they could have ports, they could pass laws, they could negotiate treaties, they could do whatever. And of course, this was incredibly lucrative. But it only works if you have settlers. And so the Calverts tried to have settlers. What's interesting is that I think people who think about Maryland often think of it as being the Catholic colony, right? Because indeed the Calverts were Catholic. And England, of course, at this point in the 1630s, was Anglican and had been since Henry VIII. But Maryland was not a Catholic colony, was not a Catholic province. Because the Calverts, smart guys that they were, realized that there were not enough Catholics on one hand, and politically it was not going to be good. You have to understand that at this period of time, much more so than today, although sometimes I wonder, your religion, the way that you worship, the way that you saw your relationship with God, really literally determined your life. Where you lived, who you were, how people saw you, and where you could live, because there were places where you couldn't live.
So Jane, if you, just to refresh our memories, what was happening in England at that time that made religion so important?
Remember Cromwell? Remember they killed Charles I, the guy who gave Maryland to the Calverts, okay, who signed the charter to Maryland. 1649, off with his head. I mean, this is very serious stuff. Virginia is Anglican. England is Anglican. Virginia is Anglican. And the governor of Virginia, Governor Berkeley, was very serious about this. Boy, if you didn't attend services with the Book of Common Prayer, you were out, literally out of Virginia. And this is what's happening. So the Calverts saw an opportunity, and they thought, well, you know, we don't want to have a religious province, but we could open it up to these Puritans, these independents, who are in Virginia, who are about to be thrown out by Governor Berkeley. And so 1649, at the same time that they have just sliced Charles I, the Calvert family decided that they would encourage these people to come. They would pass an act of toleration, saying that you cannot say anything bad about anybody if they're a Christian, no matter what they're called. And they had a whole long list of things
If
that they
they're
were
Christian.
called. If they're, well, yeah, you have to be Christian. Sorry. But if you're Christian, it doesn't matter who you are or what you are. You can be anything. And so these folks from Virginia went, hey, this is a good idea. And people living on the James River primarily decided that it would be a good idea to go north. And so they did. And they came to Maryland. They settled along the bay. I mean, they had plantations all up and down the coast, into Calvert County, above the Patapsco, into what is now Harford County. I mean, they weren't just, the traditional story is that they all came up at one time in 1649, and they all settled right there, which is really kind of not true. They kind of spread out, and they came at different periods of time from about the 1647-8 period all the way up into the 50s. By the time the Puritans are kind of seriously here, there are a couple of hundred of them, householders, and the population of Maryland is not much more than that. So they were a significant part of the Maryland population. It was a completely different environment, a different group of people than you had who usually came to Maryland, who were about 70% indentured servants. These guys were landowners. They brought their servants with them.
They sell their land. They come up to this rich agricultural environment, this
Right.
progressive, sort of tolerant religious environment.
Right.
And how do they get their lands? How do they apply for it? What was the legal process?
If you brought someone, if you paid the passage for your family, your servants, other people, you got 100 acres in 1649. After 1651, it was 50 acres again. You got 50. You got the right. You got the right to apply for acreage. Now, this is very nice. So, of course, you have to have some money to do that. But you put in for a warrant, and you go to the land office, and you say, I brought in 5 people, myself, my wife, 3 children, and also 5 servants. So I've got 10 people that I have brought in to Maryland, and therefore I could have 500 acres of land, but then there would have to be fees involved, and after that you have to have it surveyed, and then you have to pay a little bit more, and you get a patent. Once you have a patent for a piece of property, it's yours. You pay rent to the proprietor, to Lord Baltimore, which is how he's getting his money. I mean, it's very commercial. We're not altruistic here. So Lord Baltimore is getting money for each piece of property that he has a settler on that's patented, right?
Was anyone excluded from the system? Were the Spanish or the Dutch or the French? Was it only the English? Who could apply?
No, you could be anything, although most of the settlers obviously are British. Many of them are Irish, some Scots, most of them are English at this particular period of time. So it is a melting pot. And there was a period of time when the Dutch were very popular on the Chesapeake, and there was a lot of Dutch trade going on. Our county archaeologists, who are excellent, have done a lot of digging up on north side of the Severn, and have found a lot of remains of early plantation houses, which have a lot of Dutch things, Dutch tiles around the fireplaces. How did they get them? Well, because there's a lot of trade. People don't just go and stay. They move around.
So this farm was deeded to the Francis Stockett, who was one of 3 brothers. And in fact, we named our family and friends wine Stockett's Run, which is the stream that runs through the farm, named for the Stocketts. So the Stocketts arrived when, and what was the story then? How did they fit into this religious sort of potpourri?
The Stocketts are interesting because they're not part of the Virginia group that came up. They're not part of the Virginia kind of independence. The Stocketts had been royalists. And so when Charles is killed, his son Charles II, who would have been king had his father not been killed, and Cromwell not taken over, Charles II leaves. He is exiled from England. He goes to France and then probably up into the Netherlands. And the Stockett boys, there are 3 of them, okay, Francis, Thomas, and Henry. There may have been a fourth one. There's some question about that. And there are probably other children in England. But the three boys, who are young, reasonably young, apparently follow Charles II into exile, leaving their home in Kent, where they had been brought up. And in 1658, they show up in what is now Harford County, north of Baltimore. Thomas is patenting land called Delph. He's spelling it D-E-L-P-H, but you do kind of wonder if maybe he had been with Charles in the Netherlands. I don't know. But Doden, which is land that he patented about more than 10 years later, Doden probably relates to France and the time that Charles II was in France. So I think, and this often happens with patents. The name of the patent has some meaning to the guy who does the patent.
So you had sort of a theory about how they would help to bridge the Virginians and the Catholics.
Well, what they're doing, I think, what's interesting is that they start off up above the Patapsco River, and then about 12 years later they move down here, which I think is interesting. And one of them, Thomas, the one who patents obligation, because you know this
which
obligation.
Is the farm at the end of Doden Road.
Over here. The boys, they patent Doden, they patent obligation, and Bridges Hill.
Bridge Hill.
Bridge Hill.
Oh, I'm sorry. Obligation is on Route 2. Bridge Hill is here.
Is this way. So all of the properties are together, and they're all about 600 acres. Thomas marries the daughter of a Puritan from Herring Creek named Richard Wells. Richard Wells is enormously successful, a Virginia Puritan who moved up probably 1652, has a lot of property around Herring Creek. He's a physician, as is Francis Stockett. And so Thomas does very, very well. Thomas is over here at obligation. So there is a link between the two, and I think it made it comfortable for them to be here in an area which had originally been very Puritan.
Because the assimilation of the Puritans was not without some violence, I gather.
The Puritans actually turned out to be really not good people for the Calverts. It was kind of too bad because, Lord Baltimore brought them in. This is really great. You're going to save my tail. And in reality, the Puritans went, I don't think so. And so when Cromwell takes over in England, he sends people to the Chesapeake saying, you're part of us. You're part of the Commonwealth. And so the Puritans go, fine. And so indeed, Maryland is part of the Commonwealth for about 7 years. But during that time, Lord Baltimore is like, I'm not going to give out land. He's been removed. He can't give out land. So you can settle somewhere, but you don't have title to it. Now, how long can that go on before you feel really uncomfortable? So there was a deal. 1658, there was a deal. And at that point, Lord Baltimore's people and the people who were Cromwell by this time is gone, the people who were Cromwell's people got together and they said, look, we've got to work this out. And they did, which was fine. And then, of course, 2 years later, 1660, Charles II comes back. You've got a king again. Life is a little bit better. But the Stocketts were on the wave of this kind of coming together, which I think is very good. There was the only battle that took place in Maryland. The last battle of the English Civil Wars took place somewhere outside of Annapolis. You heard about this? This is the Battle of the Severn, 1655. Very big deal. Very big deal. Governor Stone sent his folks from Lord Baltimore's people came up from St. Mary's City. They're gonna show these Puritans on the Severn that they're serious, and they're gonna win them. They're just gonna take over. This is ridiculous. The Puritans, on the other hand, are nasty people, some of them, and their commander, a man named William Fuller, they're ready for it, and they've gotten some boats that happen to be in the harbor. Now, where did it take place? Where did the battle take place? I have I don't know. But there are people who argue about it to this day. I mean, serious arguments. I've had people come up to me and say, well, you know it was Annapolis, you know it was Eastport, you know it was Greenberry Point. No, I don't. But it was somewhere, and people were killed. And after the Puritans won, which they did, poor Governor Stone and his people were tied up on a peninsula they couldn't get off. The Puritans won, and they executed people. I mean, they're executing them. You know, tried to be gone. One of them being the provincial secretary. I mean, this is very serious stuff. So there was a lot of tension, And the Stocketts, when they came back here, they come back in the late 60s to this part of Anne Arundel County, where they take up land here at Doden, Obligation, and Bridge Hill. Things have calmed down a lot by that time. And I think having Thomas married to the daughter of a very well-known Puritan down in Herring Creek had a lot to do with it.
Symbolic of a reconciliation. So we were, as a state, at least in our origins, very tolerant, and then things got a little rough. But it's nice to know that the intent was there to have religious plurality, if only among Christians. So thank you, Jane. We really loved having you here. And, yeah.